Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tembi Mwamakamba. I'm from the Food, Agriculture, Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, FANRPAN. And good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, since we have so many people joining us from across the world. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar that's going to present a successful case study of resilience in the maize value chain, which can be scaled out to other countries in the SADC region. Today, we are going to be listening to a presentation from Dr. Christian Thierfelder, who is a senior cropping system agronomist at CIMMYT. He has led CIMMYT's conservation agriculture systems research since 2009, and he will be sharing with us a bit about the work that he has been doing and some of the very interesting cases that are now ready for scale up. Joining us as well is Dr. Manyeu Mutamba, who is from the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, leading the climate resilience program over there. Dr. Mutamba has been involved in the design, implementation, and evaluation of regional and continental climate resilience programs across sub-Saharan Africa, and he will be speaking as one of our discussant following the presentation by Dr. Thierfelder. So thank you so much for taking the time and joining this event. As it is 3 o'clock my time here in Pretoria, South Africa, we will begin with a presentation from Dr. Thierfelder. Over to you, Christian.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my real pleasure to talk to you about transforming maize legume value chains, a business case for climate smart agriculture in Southern Africa. My name is Christian Thierfelder. I work for CIMMYT. CIMMYT is the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. Our mission is to increase maize and wheat science for improved livelihoods. And for CIMMYT, we have 200 international scientists and 1,500 national staff in the different areas. Our headquarters is in Mexico, but we also have regional offices. 3 of them are in Africa. One in Harare, Zimbabwe, another one in Nairobi, Kenya, and the other one in Addis. Our annual budget is around $150 million US. The reason of this talk can be summarized in this map. We are facing climate change, and the projected change in agricultural productivity by 2080 will be devastating for some of the areas that we are working in. Southern Africa will be highly affected, and the climate models that have been used to predict tell us that we might face yield declines by -15 to -50%, which is quite high, and there is urgent need to adapt to this changing climate. Traditional farming systems are predominantly based on manual tillage or animal traction tillage. They are characterized by residue removal, so rarely crop residues are being kept on the soil surface. Because maize is such a predominant food security crop, it's also planted a lot in monocropping. Farmers use limited amounts of fertilizer, and they also plant often still traditional varieties. These farming systems are highly affected because they're also often on poor soils, poor sandy soils of granitic origin, which are inherently poor. The consequences will be an increased number of failed seasons. In another season, we will have flooding, erosion, soil degradation. And if you look at the bottom picture on the right, you see the effect that an El Nino year 2015-2016 had on a maize field. This maize is mature, but it's rarely knee-high. farmers from this field will not be food secure, and they will face serious problems to get by. So we will need different measures to adapt to this situation. And there will be not one solution that will fit it all, but combinations of practices and technologies that we can apply in different ways and in different forms, in different positions of a landscape. There will be maybe some areas where we practice conservation agriculture, other areas where we will do agroforestry or intercropping. There will be areas where we have to do more erosion control in different forms. But altogether, all these together will make a climate smart landscape with nutrition and food security, with systems that alleviate poverty. In 2018, we started a project called Outscaling Climate Smart Agriculture in smallholder farming systems in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. This was funded through the ACCRA project, Adaptation to Climate Change for Smallholder Rural Areas, funded by GIZ and CCARDESA. And the whole purpose of this project was to develop a credible business case. A business case for scaling climate smart agriculture. We went through a process to develop that business case, starting from a vulnerability assessment in targeted communities in different agroecologies. We also piloted climate smart agriculture technologies on farm and then prioritized them in a participatory process. We then wrote and developed and analyzed all this data and wrote this feasibility study, which is the basis of an outscaling proposal that we are now having at hand. To describe the process a little bit more in detail, the vulnerability assessment was done in target communities that face climate variability and change. We did a rural assessment through participatory rural appraisal. We identified climate hazards. We assessed those hazards and risks. We defined adaptation practices by the farmers, which were both proactive and reactive, to be able at the end to assess the vulnerability status of these communities. From there, we started piloting. In many cases, we have already piloted this for many years, but we targeted specific technologies to different areas. We worked from rainfall regimes of about 500 millimeters to 1800 millimeters, from low to mid altitude areas, from very sandy to clay loam, clay soils, and in different farming systems across different agroecologies and farming systems. Here's an example of such an intervention in Malawi, central Malawi, where we practice a maize legume rotation with groundnuts seeded under conservation agriculture with no tillage. We also have an alley cropping of pigeon pea in there to increase the carbon level of the system and to also increase the overall productivity of the system. From there, we prioritized technologies in local meetings with key stakeholders in target communities at national level, and then also at regional level, using a stratified tool, a strategic tool from GIZ, where we ranked those technologies according to set criteria: effectiveness, cost, feasibility for farmers, social acceptance, relative speed of benefits, and so on. Interestingly, in all the areas, we had different agroecologies, as I said before. Similar interventions came out on top. Intercropping or crop diversification was always scoring high. The use of drought-tolerant or stress-tolerant varieties, conservation agriculture, and different forms of organic manuring. From there, we started developing the feasibility study. For an investment proposal, we thought we need information, evidence, hard evidence on agronomic performance, economic viability and profitability of the systems, the assessment of the environmental impact, and also social and human impacts. We chose conservation agriculture as one of the target systems, and I will explain in a minute why we chose it. Conservation agriculture is a system based on minimum soil disturbance, crop residue retention, and crop diversification. And it can be practiced in different ways and forms. Planting with a simple tool like a dibble stick or in basins, and with more mechanized tools like the hoe or jab plant on the left, or in animal traction systems using an animal traction ripper or a direct seeder. And the newest is also, it can be practiced with a two-wheel tractor or four-wheel tractor. So it can be adapted to different farms, farmer types, and farming systems. And it's also very flexible when we look at the cropping system itself. It can be rotated with soybean, maize can be rotated with soybean or planted with groundnuts. It can have cowpeas, or it can have an intercropping with an agroforestry species that you see on the bottom with Gliricidia. Why did we focus on conservation agriculture? First of all, it combines all these positive technology aspects that we prioritized above. CA can help to adapt the production system to climate variability and change. We know that already. CA is more water, nutrient, and energy use efficient and improves productivity of current farming systems over time. But most importantly, we had long-term data available. CIMMYT and its national partners and NGOs that we work with, we started in 2004 to capture data on conservation agriculture systems. And with this long-term data, we could then really define what is climate smart or what is not. Here are some examples and some results. This is an example from central and southern Malawi, different target communities, and we comparing two CA systems with a conventional ridge tillage system. If you look at this graph, you see quite obviously that these systems differ, and the CA systems in most cases outperform the conventional ridge tillage system. They are all fertilized the same. They're all planted on the same date. They have the same varieties. The only difference is that we don't till the CA systems and we keep the soils covered with mulch. Here's another example from eastern Zambia. On the left, you see a CA system with mulch. On the right, you see a ridge tillage system. Both were planted on the same day, but you see a huge difference in productivity. The left is much more vigorous, much greener, much healthier as well than it is on the left, on the right, sorry. In the long term, and this is really data from up to 15 years, we see a clear yield benefit when we practice conservation agriculture systems. Here you see different types planted with a dibble stick or planted in a ridge tillage system. We compare always against a conventional system, and that is the red bar, while the others are CA systems, the yellow, the green, and the blue bar. It's very obvious that you see a yield benefit, not only in the short term, but also in the longer term. Now this graph needs a bit more explanation. Here in this graph, we really summarized each target community in each year that we practiced some form of conservation agriculture. And we have at each site a conventional control as well. So we can make this graph and plot conservation agriculture against conventional agriculture. So you see this one-to-one line that shows the difference. Everything that is above the one-to-one line is positive for CA. Everything that is below the one-to-one line is positive for conventional agriculture. We also have a 1-to-2 line, which means every dot that is above that line will yield double as much as you can yield on a conventional system at this particular site. This is very convincing for me because in more than 75% of the sites, we had a positive yield benefit in those years. Now, when we look at economic value as well, you see here the net benefits that we captured in 4 years in CA systems of Eastern Zambia. We see that the bottom graph or the bottom bar, which is the conventional ridge and furrow system, is not as productive, is not as beneficial for farmers. And over time, we found that the dibble stick maize cowpea intercropping under CA is the most beneficial financially as well. This is also confirmed with other economic values and benefit indicators. The net present value is higher, the returns on labor or investment is higher, the payback time is shorter, and the internal rate of return is more positive when you practice CA. One of the key benefits that we see in productivity increases is the labor reduction, especially in manual systems. You see here this poor lady on the right side with her baby on the back, having to make these huge ridges. She needs about 25 to 35 labor days per hectare to produce those ridges. And then when she has planted, she needs another 15 labor days to weed them. While we can avoid all of that with a conservation agriculture system where we don't make ridges and where we have an improved weed control strategy. So labor reduction is not only positive for the farmer, it's also gender sensitive, because in many cases, this kind of work is done by women and children. And if we can reduce that, it's especially the weeding, it's beneficial. Here's some environmental benefits as well. You know, I have done a lot of trials looking at infiltration, in soil moisture, erosion, and I summarized some of them for you. You see here in this graph, again, the red line is the conventional system, while the others are all CA systems of different nature. Clearly, you separate the conventional system from the CA systems. Why? Because when you plow or till the soil, you disturb the soil pore structure and the soil ability to infiltrate that water. So when you have a heavy rainstorm, you see almost no water standing on the CA fields because all is infiltrating, while most of the other water in the conventional system will just run off. And that makes it climate smart. You can see that as well if you measure soil moisture over time within the cropping season. You see the rainfalls on the bottom, and then you see different 2 CA systems and a conventional system again. During the cropping season, in most cases, there is more available soil moisture available for plant growth. And that again makes it more climate smart. Erosion. Heavy rainfalls, as I said, when the water is not infiltrating, it leads to runoff and surface erosion. And it can really affect farmers that are in sort of hillside areas. Here in this case, this was on a slope of about 7 to 10%. And we have seen that more than 140 tons per hectare have been generated in 12 years' time, because that's cumulative erosion, while we are in the range of 40 to 50 tons per hectare in the same period. So there's a huge benefit as well in saving the soil and keeping it on site. A lot of discussion goes around soil carbon. Can these systems sequester carbon? Yes, we have seen this happening on station under controlled conditions, and here we have a decline in soil carbon on a conventional powered system over time, while you have a gradual increase in soil carbon on CA systems. But in farmers' conditions, that is not as clear as you can see it here, because there are a lot of disturbing factors. Sometimes you have cattle running through the field and eating all the crop residues. There's fire and so on. So it is a bit more complex, but we can see carbon sequestration under more controlled conditions. So in a nutshell, if you look at this, in the center, you see the red conventional system, and the other two systems are conservation agriculture system. You have clear benefits because they are improving the yields, the profitability, the returns to labor. Erosion is reduced. Nutritional values are improved. Gender equity is better. And the reduction in labor has been rated very high. But this system is not a one-size-fits-all, as I said initially, and we have challenges. We otherwise cannot explain why this wonderful system with all these benefits is not adopted worldwide and everywhere. Especially for Southern Africa, where we have free grazing systems, where cattle roam around, where there is no protection of the fields. We have to ask ourselves, how can we feed both livestock and crops? Weeds. The primary reason for tillage is to control weeds. It's a major challenge if no herbicides are used or other improved weed control strategies. There's lack of fertilizer use in many households because people are cash constrained and cannot afford mineral fertilizer. But are there alternatives? Yes, there are. We can apply manure, we can rotate with green manures, and this can be used to reduce the dependency on fertilizer. Limited crop diversification. If farmers really struggle for food security, their main focus is on a food security crop, which is in many cases the maize. So we have to introduce strategies that enable diversification. Often we have lack of evidence that these systems are really outperforming the conventional system, and that's why it's difficult for farmers to convince them. Often we believe in myths. People are saying, this is better than the other, but we have no data to prove. And we often target the wrong system to the wrong farmers. I know examples where we have promoted one particular conservation agriculture system to all the farmers, regardless if they're rich or poor, if they have machinery or not, if they have animals or are manual farmers. So we have to be very careful in the way we approach this, and we need good targeting. Often donors want adoption, they want outscaling, but it's not donor driven. Farmers need to be involved in this discussion. We need to understand what are the underlying issues for low adoption, and why are farmers ignoring to adopt. We need to understand their decision making, and that also needs new knowledge. Often farmers and extension officers are trained or have acquired knowledge from long time ago. But now we want farmers to acquire new knowledge. And the only way how we can bring this to their farms is by co-development of technologies. So scaling is more than technology. It's not about CA alone or CSA alone. It requires a whole change in the surrounding system of that technology, which starts with demand and awareness. Developing a business case, as we have just done, involving and improving value chains, and finance. There needs to be finance to maybe purchase some equipment. There is new knowledge and skills that are required. People need to collaborate and not compete. We need evidence and learning. We need leadership and management. And from the governmental sector as well, we need support and an enabling environment. However, I can safely say now, we are ready. We have summarized all these project results that we have in 4 very well and detailed contemporary project reports. And this is our business case. All the data, and in much more detail that I have presented, is in there and can be used to prove that climate smart agriculture is more profitable, more environmental friendly, and gives more benefits to farmers. We have therefore developed a regional proposal which will now be presented at the COP25 side event with different work packages. One will focus on scaling climate smart agriculture with a lot of partners. One will be on knowledge generation and dissemination, packaging of that knowledge. And the last work package will be on aligning policies so we can overcome the bottlenecks and the challenges in adopting. But we need your support. We need the countries and we need all your support to get that through, to get enough funding to continue with this work. So if we ask ourselves, can we scale out conservation, climate smart agriculture? Can we scale it out? I think we can safely say, with the words of a more prominent leader than I am, yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that presentation. Wow, there's just so much there. It was exciting just for me to note the sort of different benefits that you have recorded, environmental, but also looking at how labor is saved, especially for women farmers. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Actually, I have here quite a number of questions. But before we get into the questions, and please, anyone who has a question, you can feel free to just drop it through into the question and answer tab. But later on, we'll also have a discussion for sort of live questions and answers. But for now, I want to just turn to Dr. Manyewu Mutamba, who is the Senior Program Officer at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, responsible for leading the Climate Resilience Program. Manyewu, you have also been working in the space for quite a number of years. And in 2014, when the heads of state and government for Africa made it clear that they are committing to action on agriculture, climate change, nexus issues, they took a decision and endorsed the NEPAD program on agriculture, climate change, which includes some components on gender empowerment, intensified support to smallholder farmers. And in the same process, it set up the African Climate Smart Agriculture Coordination Platform as a means in pursuit of what was endorsed as the African Union vision of having 25 million farm households practicing CSA by 2025. So there's this Africa Vision 25 by 25 on CSA. Having listened to Christian's presentation, I wonder if you have some reflections, some thoughts that you can share with us, especially coming from a place where you are sitting in an institution that has declared that by 2025, at least 25 million farm households will be practicing CSA. Your reflections, please, on the presentation. Thank you. If you can maybe unmute your mic. You are on mute.
All right, thank you. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, you're quite clear.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Tendi, for the introduction, for the background, and to Christian for that very insightful presentation. I think, you know, I agree with a lot of what you said about climate smart agriculture, about the challenge that we face in the region and continentally in terms of climate risk, and already, you know, the battle that we have in terms of trying to transform agriculture on the continent, particularly smallholder agriculture. You know, when I was listening to your presentation, you know, I was very glad that you managed to make a very strong case in terms of the clarity that we have now with respect to climate smart agriculture as a viable option in terms of our response to climate change. I think there's growing consensus, you know, in many of the countries and communities that I've worked with, I think a lot of the sentiment agrees with what you presented in your presentation. You know, the options that you outlined. You know, the possibility of aligning the different CSA options to the circumstances of the farmers, to the specific climate risks that the different agro ecosystems are facing, that, and also the ability to be able to integrate that suite of the options that are available to strengthen the impacts, or to harness the synergies across the different interventions. I think you really made a good a strong case in terms of what we know now, and you over the years, I think a lot of the work that you and other colleagues in this area have done is really strengthened the confidence and the understanding of what works and under what conditions. So I'm very comfortable to say that at this point in time, like you said, that we are ready to move to the next level. I also understand you mentioned that there are still some areas of improvement, some challenges that we need to do better in terms of trying to address issues of mulch, issues of crop livestock, some of the the seemingly conflicting sort of interests. There's still some work to be done on the technical side, like I said, but I'm quite confident that we have options that we can take forward in terms of scaling up. And when it comes to the issue of scale, this is for me, like you were also quite clear. I think this is the next battlefield. Having made a very good, strong technical case, or even an economic case on climate smart agriculture or components such as CA, I think the next battlefield now is really around how do we take this to scale. As Thembi, as you mentioned, the ambition really at the continental level is really summarized in the 25 by 25 sort of target, where the ambition is to say by 2025 we need to have at least 25 million smallholder farming households practicing climate smart agriculture. That's a very ambitious target, but at the same time it's something that's meant to really elevate the issue, also give ourselves something to work with, and also just demonstrate how committed politically the political leaders are in terms of supporting this initiative. But I must add that it's not going to be an easy sort of achievement to get to, because as you would agree, while technically and economically climate smart agriculture is attractive, it comes in, we're trying to promote it in an environment where we already have long-standing perennial challenges in terms of functionality of agriculture, and the efforts to try and transform smallholder agriculture on the continent have been in play for many years, and the challenges are very clear. And some of the bottlenecks or some of the constraints that we face, some of them you even outlined them in terms of the finance side, the marketing side, getting decent support services, just getting information to flow. All these things are still a key part of how you outscale climate smart agriculture, how you reach more farmers, how you ensure that farmers have the technology, the capacity, and the incentives to actually adopt some of the the technologies, the practices that actually work you need to fix these things before you can expect farmers to start picking up, what seemingly, looks like a very attractive, intervention. So these perennial, sort of constraints that we face within, the African agriculture are a big part of what we need to overcome if we are to see the ambitious targets of 25 million smallholder, farmers, practicing climate smart agriculture. So we are very much aware of that challenge, and I think as you move forward, I'm glad that you're already putting, on the table a proposal that looks to, to tackle, the scaling challenge, to address some of the, key sort of, things that have been holding us back in terms of, addressing the, the scale issue, whether it's at the policy level, whether it's at the general environment, level. I think now that's where, the fight needs to be taken. And I'm confident that there are already examples of very, very, very promising innovation models in terms of how do you structure partnerships with the private sector, with government extension systems, to try and already overcome, some of these constraints that farmers face in terms of trying to take on climate smart agriculture. So I think we have, a good background, now that can help us move forward in terms of how do we actually address, the challenges in scaling up. And we have some way to go. 25 million smallholder farmers by 2025 already looks like we are some way off to reaching that target. But I think we should be in a space where we should start to see some decent progress and some innovation in terms of how to overcome, many of the challenges that you outlined. So I'll stop here for now, and yes, I think we can have a discussion.
Thank you, Manyeo, for that intervention. We are 5 years away from 2025, so it will be interesting to see, given the many sort of success cases as one presented by Christian, to see how we can collate all those success stories for scale up. So we have received quite a number of questions, and Christian, I will ask you to address. I'm sure you're seeing some of the questions.
No,
the first question. Oh, you don't see the questions. Okay, let me just read you. The first set of questions come from Harriet Smith, who asks that in her understanding is that you first piloted, then prioritized CSA practices through stakeholder engagement. However, how did you first determine which CSA activities to pilot? That's the first question. How did you determine which CSA activities to pilot? What, and if any, off-farm interventions was provided through these projects? That's the second question. And the third question is, which approaches were the most supportive to enable farmers to use the CSA practices, and how? You can maybe tackle those first three, and then we'll get to the other questions.
Okay. When we started this project in 2018, we had already about 14 years of research experience with these kinds of systems. And because we were working in target communities already for many, many years. And what we had in our hands was already sort of the best bets that we had at this stage. And we piloted new elements, but we did not pilot everything new in all areas. So in some areas, we continued with what we have been doing so far and just improved and adjusted the technology slightly so they become even more climate smart. And we did not provide any off-farm interventions because that is not our mandate. We were working much more on farm with farmers. But I agree, if we had provided that, we would have probably have a stronger case than just working on farm. Now, the last question I did not get. What was our approach? Yes, we worked in target communities on a community-based approach. In each target communities, we had at least 6 farmers hosting a trial with different options. We supported that with a lot of participatory evaluation and analysis over time, not in 1 year only, but in many years. And we encouraged that farmers try to adopt from those what we call mother trials. So the mother and baby trial approach is our vehicle in this case. But we have also worked with other kinds of interventions like the lead farm approach, or just with ordinary demonstration and field day approaches. For us, the most successful has been the mother and baby approach, and in some areas also where we involve the private sector, where we have had a market-led approach. Because we believe the markets play a crucial role in demanding specific crops. For example, cowpeas or soybeans are really directly related to markets. If there is a market for cowpeas, then they scale very, very nicely. If there's not, it's only for home consumption, and then it's very difficult to scale. Okay, I think I've answered those 3 questions.
Those 3 questions. Okay, thanks. Then the next question that we have is from Alyam Leji, who asks, how do you get this transition to be funded away from donors and grants to a more market, private sector-driven scaling approach?
This is an interesting one, and also the most complicated and complex one. We have different kinds of donors or funders. Some are interested only in scaling. They want numbers as fast as possible. Some are interested in process research and understanding what works where and why. And our strategy has been to work very closely with development partners, both from the public and the private sector. We worked a lot with Total Land Care in Malawi and Zambia. We worked with the Catholic Relief Service, with Caritas, with other major NGOs who had sort of the same vision and agenda as we had. And what we really tried to do is to have a long-term vision. You know, I've been working on these systems for about 15 years now in the region. And my long-term vision has always been from the start, I wanted to make those mainstream cropping systems in farming households of Southern Africa. So there were donor X and donor Y coming in with a small project here and project there, but they were all funding the same thing. The long-term vision that I wanted to achieve is transformational change, not only on the technology side, but also on the market side, the policy side, the agro-dealer side, because only then we will have sustainable scaling. You know, we have seen technologies come and go. There is a new this and a new that, a new variety, a new agroforestry species. But if you want to really have an impact in the longer term that leads to sustainable development goals, you need to have a transformational change, which means you have to change all elements of the system. And that's why I'm so happy to work with FANRPAN as well, is because FANRPAN offers the option to work on the policy level and change conducive policies to our needs.
Thank you, Christian. We are also excited with the partnership with CIMMYT, especially in scaling up some of these success stories. The next question that we have comes from Simon Hughes, who I think picks up your point in your presentation. One of the things that you presented were the sort of reports that you have produced out of the project that you have been implementing. And he asked, what is the role of knowledge management and communication in this scaling out process? The manuals will be helpful at national and research level, but how can we take this to extension level and farmers?
Yes, that's a very good question. I really like it. And if you still see my presentation, I don't know if you see that still, we have started to extract all the information that we have into user-friendly, impactful infographics. We have a whole series of infographics developed now, which we are using in the development world and in the extension of these technologies. Some are directed to policymakers and decision makers because they want numbers. But others are clearly directed to farmers as well and to extension officers. So these 4 reports that I've shown, this is just all the information that we have summarized in a comprehensive way. But we have started to extract the information to make it user-friendly and make it applicable and make it very important learning tools. And because we are working with CCARDESA in this project, which is a knowledge provider and who actually supplies us with a framework for knowledge sharing and extension, we use those platforms that CCARDESA offers to increase our impact.
Okay, thank you for that response. The next question that we have is from Bjorn Hecht. The question is, we are often confronted with disbelief when we say that we promote conservation agriculture and reduced organic inputs in Eastern Province, Zambia. For many people, it seems unimaginable. In your view, is this combination in its initial stage, or does it already represent a significant amount of area under CA? In principle, is CA in practice already better than its reputation?
That's a good question as well. For me, CA is not a different agriculture system than conventional agriculture when it comes to input use. For CA, you need good agriculture practices as well. You need good fertilization, you need good seed, you need good rotations, and all of that. So CA is not organic farming. We still use synthetic fertilizers or mineral fertilizers. We use herbicides as well when there is need to. And the only difference that we see with conservation agriculture in comparison to the conventional system is that we remove the unsustainable parts of the system. Instead of monocropping, we try to diversify. Instead of heavy tillage, we try to do no tillage to disturb the soil as little as possible to increase biological activity and soil fertility. And instead of burning or removing the crop residues, we try to keep them on the soil to protect the soil against rainfall, heat stress, and so on. But all the other good agriculture practices are required and needed to make conservation agriculture work. So for me, often people say, CA is such a complex technology. It's not. It's just that we don't have to practice these unsustainable parts of it. Just to give you a little story, last year I traveled through southern Zambia in an area where we have experienced one of the worst droughts I've ever seen in Zambia. Farmers were really devastated. This year, very interesting development, most of the farmers that we have seen there have started to rip their fields and planting in rip lines under CA. So in the long run, this will maybe make the change. The stress in the climate, the little rainfall that we get, and the knowledge that we have passed on to those farmers that with no tillage, residue retention, and crop rotation, you can overcome the problems that you have with a changing climate.
Great, thank you. The questions are just rolling in, so just brace yourself. The next question that we have is from Jerome, who asked, in your opinion, what will be the best co-development CSA scaling systems to accelerate farmers' adoption of CSA? Do you have some examples?
What would be the best co-development strategy?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, at least what we do in CIMMYT and in some of the NGOs that we have been working is that we don't develop a fixed package of technologies and pass it on to the farmers and push it down their throat in hope for adoption. We work together with farmers in communities. We do research with farmers together, and that's what we call co-development. We hear their voices. We see what they like, what they don't like. We change what we can change within the agronomic system, and valuing the farmers and their opinion, I think, is critical, because only then they feel ownership for the technologies that we are trying to promote, and they will eventually adopt it.
Thank you. The next question that we have is from Stephen Wheatfield. He says it will be great to hear more about the forthcoming proposal about how to achieve the scaling out. How are CIMMYT proposing to move from research to implementation and uptake?
Well, we definitely will have not so much research in this proposal because it's about scaling. But we will work in communities again with a lot of partners in the region, both governmental and private sector partners, and also NGO partners. We will scale technologies, but at the same time, we will not only work on the demand side, we will also work on the supply side to find the barriers to adoption, to overcome the problems that exist on both sides, and develop incentives that make the supply side actually promote and adopt this kind of system. Because once we have a market pull, we will be very confident that systems that are based on climate smart agriculture will scale. At the same time, we will also have, as I said in the presentation, as a second work package, we will work much more on the knowledge part. How we package knowledge in a more user-friendly way that farmers can really benefit from that kind of knowledge. And we will work with a lot of contemporary knowledge products, not only videos or messages or infographics or so. We will work and we develop those so that they become relevant for farmers and not only for decision makers or scientists.
Okay, great. So maybe
Stephen is interested. He just lets me know. I will share the proposal with him at one stage.
Okay, all right, great. Let me see, perhaps to give you a breather, there is a question here that Stephen also asked that picks on the comments that Manyewu made with regards to the targets on CSA adoption. Stephen asked, can a CSA adoption target of 25 million smallholder be problematic? Does it perhaps lead to a bias towards promoting standard practices that are measurable and clearly defined rather than on the importance of adapting practices to context?
Yes, to be, I guess, related to that question, I think I would insist that the climate smart agriculture, like the presentation has shown, is not one practice, it's not one technology, it's a basket of options. And I should emphasize that whatever the ambition is, whether it's 25 million or whether it's 5 million or whether it's 20 farmers, we still need to insist that whatever options that you choose are addressing the climate risks, they're addressing the priorities of farmers, and so there's no deviation from having to tailor these interventions to the climate risk, to the agroecology in specific regions. So I don't think we can come up with blanket recommendations or standard practices that that we believe could work across the continent. I think one of the key lessons on climate smart agriculture is that climate smart, a practice or a technology that is climate smart in one village is not necessarily climate smart in another village. So having to match, those things is really important. And even from the work that we have done so far, trying to see the progress that we've made across the continent in adoption of climate smart agriculture, it's very clear that CSA is not, the same thing in different countries, in different communities, in different regions. It is very different. And even at the farmer level, they have a clear understanding that you have to, to fit into your system, you have to actually address the real, climate risks that you are facing. So, for me, I think that's a fundamental principle in how climate smart agriculture, scaling has to be done. You really have to ensure that you're addressing the real climate risks and you are fitting in with whether the farmers are growing in a maize system, whether these are livestock farmers, they will require very different practices and technologies. Whether the farmers have access to irrigation, you will have to come up with very different, technologies and practices that are, trying to, to address their challenges within those systems. So again, I should emphasize that regardless of the ambition, you still need to stick to the principle of, very targeted interventions and, directly responding to the climate risk.
Thank you, Manyewo, for that. I guess this also is echoed by Charity Osei Amposa's question. She says, adoption of CSA is usually context-specific, so success within some contexts may not necessarily mean the same CSA approaches will be successfully adopted in other different contexts. So for Christian, she asks, how can we overcome such challenges in scaling out CSA approaches to ensure that all targeted farmers buy into CSA in their farming system?
Well, if I knew all the answers, I wouldn't be working anymore. But I think what is really needed in all what we're doing, we have to understand the barriers and constraints to adoption first, from the farmer level, from the private sector level, from the governmental level as well, or the country level. So scaling issues are multidisciplinary and multi-layered problems. So first of all, and this is what we're proposing in this new proposal, is to have a thorough understanding of the barriers and bottlenecks that we should find out by now, and then develop strategies to address those. I don't have all the answers. I must be very clear with you. If I had them, I would have achieved everything and I would probably have gotten the World Food Prize, but I haven't. So that's why I still do research on CA systems, and I still have a lot of questions. Scaling in itself is a research area that we all often underestimate. How do we scale? Is outscaling really what we require? Is upscaling more important, which means getting an institutional change? Or is scaling deep, which is the newest word, important? Make a change in the farmers' minds, which needs more psychological skills and technical skills. So this requires a lot of work. CIMMYT has now a scaling research unit. I know other centers as well. So with the help of all these specialists and the work that we want to do, we will be able to overcome those scaling barriers.
Thanks, Christian. I am sure one day you're going to win the World Food Prize. moving on with our questions, we are left with exactly 15 minutes to conclude this webinar. And we still have about 8 questions to go through. So I'll try to go through them quite quickly. But I found this one particularly interesting because it's Tika Kaki. And I assume she or he is based in Nepal, because the question is, in Nepal, weed management problem in DSR is compelling farmers to leave it, even if they feel it is profitable and sustainable. How to address this crucial issue?
You know, as I said in my presentation, weed is a major challenge to the adoption of CSA and in particular CA systems. If you don't have a proper weed control strategy, if you don't have the technologies on site, it's very difficult. Yes, manual weeding can be an option, but it's labor intensive and we might increase the labor for farmers in the initial years. After 3 to 5 years, the weed pressure goes down. But I don't shy away from, you know, some people use herbicides and we also use them where necessary. So that's a strategy as well. Rotation with competitive species like with green manures can be an option. But you have to think carefully when you apply the principles of conservation agriculture, and you need to think from the start, how will I deal with the weeds? You need to have knowledge about the weeds, what kind of weeds are there, and how can we address them both through the cropping system and more or through another intervention.
Thank you. Then a couple of questions about adoption. I think I'll just sort of try and group them together. There's somebody who is using a Galaxy Tab A who asked, has your research it says the presentation has shown many positives from CA. Has your research generated data that thus far that ambiguously demonstrates the role of CSA, CA in this case, in achieving food security in the countries you have focused? Or have you come across such data? Or is food security from CSA still an ideal or ambition yet to be proven from, since we are still at the scaling out stage?
Yes, we have in our team a group of socioeconomists that analyze this more carefully. And if the question asked, the one who asked the question wants to know more in detail, he should get in contact with us. But yes, we can safely say there is an increased food and nutrition security when we practice CSA.
Okay, great. And then there's a question here to say, are there any perception studies conducted on why farmers do not adopt some of these CSA technologies that you know of?
For sure. This is also a large part of our research. We want to find out why it's not adopted, what are the reasons, what are the barriers. And there's a new project upcoming that wants to really drill into this question. It will be funded through the Norwegian government, hopefully. And that will specifically focus on the question, why, if CA is so brilliant, has it not been adopted? And what are the barriers to those adoption?
Okay, I'm quickly running through the questions now. Teza Hammonds asks, what would be effective ways of disseminating CA evidence knowledge back to farmers to address mentioned beliefs and myths?
Well, I mean, Tilze knows very well that working on farm with farmers is a way to change people's mindset. But we really have to understand first where they're coming from, understanding their constraints to be able to change them and provide them with solutions and options. So it is important that we are not doing our research in a bubble. We need to do research with farmers on farm in collaboration with them to understand what is needed. And based on that, I'm sure we will be able to understand and overcome those challenges. And we talk about knowledge dissemination, again, we have to have knowledge products that are applicable, user-friendly, and can be taken up by farmers easily. So a lot of pictorials, a lot of easy digestible information that can make an impact has been very successful in our work.
Okay, and also talking about knowledge management and disseminating information, Hannah has just shared that yesterday CARDESA launched a new mobile application on climate smart agriculture, which is available on Google Play Store, and she provided a link there, which we will also share quite widely. All right, so let's take I think I'm left with about 2 more questions, and we have about 10 minutes to wrap up. What would you say is the yield loss in groundnuts in relation to non-flatland planting? Some farmers say they lose yield due to flatland planting for groundnuts.
Yeah, our experience has been the opposite, and I will tell you why. In Malawi, where we have a lot of groundnut maize rotations, farmers grow groundnuts on ridges. Ridges are spaced at 75 centimeters apart. And in the middle of those ridges, there is land that is not utilized effectively. When you don't make any ridges and we have a flat planting environment, you can plant them much closer. So we plant those groundnuts at 37.5 centimeters, so half the row spacing that you have on the ridges. And by doing that, you almost double the yield that you get on the groundnuts as compared to planting it on the ridges. This is amazing and has been a real game changer for farmers. Yes, there are still issues with lifting of groundnuts, I agree. But when farmers lift those groundnuts at a conducive time when the soil is still a little bit wet, this is not a problem. They can just pull them out, and it's much possible to harvest them easily. In my experience, this is a myth that you have less yield when you plant on the flat. To the contrary, we harvest more than double.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to Harriet Smith's questions because she had quite a couple of questions. One of the questions that she asked is, do you have any insights into other outcomes for CA that don't primarily focus on economic productivity or agroecological outcomes, such as soil carbon sequestration, etc.?
We look at nutrition and human benefits as well, and gender is a big issue in our current research to better address and understand what are the gender effects when you practice conservation agriculture. We know already that you can get yield reductions, but in some cases also yield increase. We know already that we can increase the nutritional value, but it's not yet all published. We are about to do that. Apart from those that are really directly related to the farm, we also look at factors that affect, for example, pest management. We have a lot of research on fall armyworm at the moment, and we have measured and seen and captured a lot of data now, which clearly shows that a system like conservation agriculture, which is more diverse and has a greater biological activity, can overcome the issues of fall armyworm very effectively. And this research is ongoing, and if she's interested, she should just get in contact and I will share some of the results with her.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello? Hi.
Yes.
Okay, so the last question comes from Justin Mwanje, who says that the youth are the future of CSA. What should their role be and how could they be enabled? Any thoughts on youth engagement in CSA?
Yes, we have. We have a whole new research area in our programs that deal with mechanization, and another area that deals with ICT. Mechanization is an easy one because farmers, especially young farmers, they don't want to go back to the hoe and face the same drudgery as their parents and grandparents. But when we start with mechanization using two-wheel tractors or mechanized shellers or other tools that you can mechanize, all of a sudden farming becomes very attractive to the youth. And also there are business opportunities for young people. We have seen in different projects that are managed by my colleagues that youth get very excited. We had a shelling group in Makonde here in Zimbabwe who made enormous profits, about $7,000 just by shelling maize for other farmers, and others who have started businesses with two-wheel tractors, not using it only for planting, but also for shelling, for transport, for water pumping and all other things. So this is where we see a lot of opportunities for young people, bringing them back to the farm, which is very important because we don't want them to go all to town and trying to sell cell phone cards on the roadside. We want them to become farmers or stay farmers, and that is very important. And mechanization is an avenue that we can explore in that direction. As well, a lot of young people are very versatile with new gadgets, telephones, iPad, and so on. So in that regard, we can address them much better when we use ICT for decision making. So I see a role in those young people, and I hope it will be inspiring because the more business opportunities there are, the more young people get also excited and engaged.
Great, thanks. We are now left with 4 minutes to conclude the session. We had a question that I had missed from Zira Maunganidze, who asked, are there solutions to reduce drudgery in CSA? Are you able to quickly answer that question?
Well, I've already answered with the mechanization. That is a huge benefit. And, you know, when you start from a manual system to animal traction, you reduce already the number of days you need to plant. But when you go mechanized with a two-wheel tractor, you reduce the number of hours to 1.5 per hectare. And our way of doing that is through service provider models so not all the farmers need to buy a tractor, but there is a lot of drudgery that can be reduced, not only on the planting side, but also on the shelling, which is a huge part of the labor that farmers have to do. So I see a lot of benefit in mechanizing, and this is a way to go.
Okay, great. That comes to the end of our questions. And before we conclude and say goodbye, Manyewu, are there any sort of last words from your end?
Just to say, perhaps on the issue of the youth and what needs to be done for them to really come on board, I completely agree with Christian that they have a very unique role and they're better positioned to really pick up a lot of the technology, you know, really quickly, a lot of, you know, the nimbleness that's required to understand markets, to be able to connect with the private sector and other partners. I think there's a real unique opportunity that we have on the continent to be able to tap into the you know, capital that comes with the youth, but we also need to create an environment that enables them to come on board. We spoke earlier about you know, having to enable financing models that are inclusive, that take on board some of these ideas. For them to be able to be service providers, they actually need the financing to be able to acquire the equipment. and the technology they need. So there's a lot that we need to do as well to enable the youth to come on board. So there is certainly promise there, but there is some work to be done at the same time. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Manyeo. Christian, in the last minute.
I have a final statement that I want to say. If we want to reach 25 million by 2025, we need a transformational change. That is very critical. We should not continue pushing technologies here and there only. We need to have all the players, all the required change agents on board to reach transformational change. Once we have that, we will also be getting to the 25 million. And that's my last statement.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Christian, for the wonderful presentation, for the patience in addressing all these questions that we had for you today. And thank you to you, Manyeo, for your observations, for sharing the sort of direction that in terms of our policy leaders are taking, and we do hope really that we'll see more of these CSA success stories being scaled up. As Christian mentioned, we are going to be presenting some proposals that are ready for scale up at COP25 in Madrid in the coming week. So please be on the lookout. Do follow us on Twitter at FANRPAN. You can follow Christian at BZBChris, and you can follow Manyeo at NEPAD Agency. Thank you so much to our participants who have been very good and have asked the difficult questions that have kept this webinar interesting. Thank you, and hopefully we will again have more of the same to deliberate on how we can scale up some of the success stories of CSA. Thank you, and have a good day to you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.